It's a movie I seen a long time ago, which I'm not going to mention. Probably a lot of people would know it just by describing it, but it was a really interesting point at the end of the film that I think is actually really key if we could actually really hear it. And that would be a guy who's been in prison for a really long time, and every 10 years the people come to check and see, has he been reformed, are you ready to go back into the community? And he tries to put on a face. He puts on this what he thinks people want to hear, and says, yeah, I'm ready to go back. I've learned my lesson, I'm ready to change. And they just said, yeah, whatever. And they said, no, you didn't pass. Come back 10 years later and the same thing happens. Are you reformed? Are you ready to get back into the community? Are you a safe person to be around? Blah, blah, blah. And he said, yeah, I'm changed my ways. I'm looking to it. And then finally, after the third time, 30 years later, after he's been in prison, he says, have you learned your lesson? Blah, blah, blah. Are you a changed person? And he says, I don't know. I just wished I could go back, knowing what I know now, and talk to who I was when I was younger. I wish I can go back in time and talk and speak into the heart of who I was 30 years ago. Today I'm realizing how important that is. I'm going through another thought here that was actually quite considerable. If you could go back and have a conversation with yourself and tell yourself something that would give you a tip off for your future, if you felt like you could do something better, if you could have done things different, do you have regrets? Do you wish you could have gone back and done things differently? Do you wish you would have worked a little harder on something, or would you have avoided a decision, or took a path differently, or looked at things differently? Would you go back and tell yourself something different? That is a really powerful thought, because I'm sitting here thinking that, and it really struck me. And I'm like, wow, would I go back and do things differently? Yes, I would. I would do a lot of things differently. And it's a pretty humbling thing to think about, because, sometimes you have these moments where you feel like you see something so clearly, and thus you know everything. You really get the big picture. But then would you go back and do things differently? Yeah, I think that's probably one of the best ways to know that we're really getting it, is to know that, yeah, I would love to file things away and make things better decisions or what have you. But I think if I had a chance to go back and tell myself what to do, I would definitely bring myself into a much more disciplined life. I would put myself into a much more disciplined world, and to be very sensitive to the details. It's two things that the Holy Spirit has talked to me about: integrity, taking the seriousness of the very big and basic things in a human life. Take the very biggest things and try to be as legit about these as possible, because how easily something, you start off on one path and how it slowly changes into something else that it wasn't really, it just doesn't have the same ring as what it used to when you first were so young and so excited about it. And then something just like, it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I was like, shoosh, I wish I would have just kept it really plain, keeping everything so clear and plain. If I'm going to be getting a job, it's got to be like this. And if I'm going to have community people I'm going to be hanging around with, they're going to be like this. And when they aren't like this, then I'm going to have to be away from them, and if I'm ever going to go into, your relationship, I would have done things a whole lot differently in that department too, realizing there's a lot of things that must be. It makes it kind of hard sometimes when people who you're connecting with change from what you thought they were or what they said that they were, and then they drift off, and then what are you going to do? It happens in business, it happens in a lot of friendships, it happens in ministry, it happens in connections of all sorts. It's difficult. That's one of the most difficult things about following God, is that unifying with God, you get used to where he brings you to, and then you forget that he was the one who brought you, and that was the reason why you went there. And now you went there, now you think that that's all there is to God, and that's not true. He may have to make a shorter season for a certain place that you went to. It's considerable. If we had a chance to go back 30 years and talk to who we were, what would we say to ourselves, and what difference would that be today? Would we go back and do it? I think if we ever said, Lord, I want to follow you today, then it would be inevitable to say, yes, I would like to go back and do things differently. I don't regret anything or anything. I couldn't imagine anybody saying I don't regret anything. I think we all have regrets. If we want to get super real with the Lord, to say, Lord, I don't want to do anything that is not pleasing in your sight. And I can look back and think there's a lot of things I did that was unpleasing to you. And what kind of a Christian is it to say, I don't care that I did everything wrong because now I'm a better person. Now I'm stronger. Now I'm wiser. No. When we made up our mind to do what is right in God's sight, then we're wiser. We don't have to put our foot in the fire to burn it and say, yeah, you're right, that did hurt. And that's kind of the attitude we have when we say, well, I'm wiser now and I'm tougher now. Now I'm ready to face the world as it is. No, you're just lying to yourself is what it really is. What would we do if we had the chance? What would we say to ourselves if we had the chance to go back 30 years and speak into our life and to redirect our paths? What would we say to ourselves?